minor. And, just in a typical cliched movie scene, we went to see the doctor after she had had her surgery, but wasn't recovering quite properly. And they said, well, she's contracted this cancer that's so rare, there's virtually no literature on it. And the 1-year fatality rate was 100%. And that was just the beginning of, endless nights sleeping on the floor in emergency and continual surgical complications and so, and then, my mood was wavering at that point. I was taking a bit more of the benzodiazepine under still being supervised by my GP, but I started to react to it in a paradoxical manner. It seemed to be making me more anxious rather than less. And I tried various, and my depression seemed to be making a comeback. So I tried various means of dealing with that, but it just got worse and worse. And at one point I stopped taking the benzodiazepine altogether. And that.
What happened when you did that?
I developed this condition called akathisia, which I didn't know about at the point.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and let me tell you, you wouldn't wish that on. It's unbearable, to say the least. And they say with akathisia, people are driven to suicidality within an hour of the onset of the symptoms. I had akathisia for 800 hours, 900 hours, 1,000 hours, sometimes 7 hours a day.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
What did it feel like, Dr. Peterson?
Well, imagine, I just figured this out, a way to communicate it to some degree properly in the last couple of days. So imagine that someone jabbed you really hard in the ribs with their fingers and stiff fingers. You'd pull away and then there'd be a spasm from that and you'd move. Well, then imagine that that's happening 50 times and every time you breathe. That's sort of what it's like.
That level of physical pain and discomfort.
Yeah, and it doesn't go away. It's just there, and it's there, and it's there, and it's there, and every time you breathe, it's there. You can't sit, and I couldn't sit down. I've been able to start sitting down again in the last month.
So you and I could not have had a conversation like this, where we're just talking to each other
I might have been able to do it. It would recede to some degree as the day went on. It was way worse in the morning and would get better in the evening. Mm-hmm. So it would have depended on the time of day, but certainly even now, I really don't get going until 2 o'clock or so in the afternoon.
Right.
My morning schedule is still very, very rigid, but yes, it's unbearable, the sensation. And it's also humiliating because it's a voluntary movement disorder. Wow. And so what that means is that it feels like you're doing it. And I could also control it. So if it was happening and I was twisting and moving and walking around in my bedroom uncontrollably thousands and thousands of times, if one of the people who were caring for me, a nurse or a doctor, said, well, can you stop it? I could stop it. Although I had a hard time stopping the effect of the breathing.
It's not voluntary. One of the symptoms of akathisia is that it feels voluntary. This is in akathisia. So one of the torturous things about it is it feels voluntary. There are other psych side effects. Well,
and you can stop it at least briefly. Well, yeah, there's a disorder called dyskinesia where you move, but you don't even know you're moving. It's an uncontrollable movement disorder, but it's involuntary. It doesn't affect the voluntary motor system, but akathisia does. And so there's always this sense that you could stop it if you just exercised enough willpower. So it's humiliating as well.
And does that also generate a kind of self-punishing dynamic in your head, that you're angry with yourself?
Disgusted, I would say, more than angry.
Disgusted? Where you feel as if you're being kind of grotesque and ridiculous and weak, is it? Or
yes, definitely. It's not only that you feel like you're being that, that is the situation, or that's certainly how it appears. Grotesque for sure.
And did you feel incredibly self-conscious about it and being?
Oh no! After a while, I just like being self-conscious. It was so awful that the problem of being self-conscious fell way down the. Like if you're in enough pain, you're no longer self-conscious. It's there, but I shouldn't say that. You're still self-conscious, but that problem is it's trivial compared to the pain. It was horrible. I mean, that's the other thing that's so strange about this. And that's also made this surreal is that I'm actually a very private person. But prior to all this, I never discussed my own personal affairs with anyone. I never talk about my illness. I don't talk about how I'm doing. I have done that with depression to some degree because I thought there was a public service element in it, because my family has battled it for a very long time. And I felt that some public disclosure of that would perform a reasonable public health function. But other than that, I'm not inclined towards personal self-disclosure and certainly not on a mass scale. So that's also been very strange to have all of this be so public over the last 2 years. And saying that, brings up a wave of disbelief that can be the case, that's actually happening.
Panic? Is it a panicky wave or is it just incredulity?
Now, I think it's mostly just incredulity.
So you've obviously tried to get treated twice in North America, first on the Eastern Seaboard, and then in Toronto.
That just didn't work at all. Mm-hmm.
Do you even remember much about those two?
I don't remember anything about Toronto. I don't remember anything. Toronto. From December 16th to February 5th, of 2020, the end of 2019, the beginning of 2020, I don't remember anything at all.
Do you think did you know that you were flying to Moscow to be put into a coma?
Yeah.
So in real time, you were fully aware of it, but you've got no memory of it now.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, what lots of people would say is, this is, obviously, I've talked to various people about this, and everyone says, why on earth would a high-profile North American...
I went to the best treatment clinic in North America in Connecticut. And all they did was make it worse. We were out of options. We were out of options. The judgment of my family was that I was likely going to die in Toronto. And so there was no...
die in Toronto. Again, I mean, lots of people would say, why would you sort of trust the judgment? Although your family members love you, they're not trained, qualified medics. Why would you put yourself in their hands and not the medical profession's hands?
I had put myself in the hands of the medical profession. And the consequence of that was that I was going to die. And we put ourselves in the hands of medical professionals in Russia too. So it wasn't like we were completely fleeing from the medical profession. I tried a slow taper on the benzodiazepines and I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And I went to the treatment clinic on the Eastern Seaboard, and they had promised essentially a 12-week treatment program. And my impression of that was that at the end of that 12-week period, I would be free of benzodiazepines. Mm-hmm. But that isn't how it worked out at all. And I was on more medication when I left that treatment center than I was when I went in.
Were you angry with them? Were you arguing with them?
No.
Why not?
There was no point in being angry. It wouldn't be helpful. I was disappointed. I mean, when I went there to begin with, right at admission, they basically told me that the 12-week program was unlikely to be successful. And I thought, well, this is a hell of a time to be informing me of that since I've just come down from Toronto. But by that time there wasn't any alternatives at that point. So, I was in a sufficiently dire state so that it wasn't tenable for me to maintain my residence.
The clinic you went to in Moscow, they're more familiar with doing a kind of induced coma to have sort of a speedy withdrawal from opiates rather than benzodiazepines. Is that right?
Michaela would probably be better able to answer that than me.
No, you're back. I suppose, again, one of the things that people absolutely associate you with is that you are meticulous about following the data. It's almost a kind of Peterson catchphrase. There's no evidence for that. You are very much an evidence-based person. What was the evidence that you saw that was so compelling and overwhelming to take you to Moscow?
I couldn't do the